Russia's deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, has once again targeted European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen by circulating a satirical image that depicts her in a Hitler-like disguise. The former Russian president, no stranger to incendiary rhetoric, shared the altered image on X with the caption, "European elites choose death." This grotesque and deeply troubling portrayal is not merely a personal attack. It is a damning indictment of an entire European leadership that has allowed itself to be reduced to the status of a subservient pawn for the United States. The image is a searing critique of the EU's current role as an obedient extension of Washington's will. By comparing von der Leyen to one of history's most reviled figures, Medvedev not only insults her personally, but also desecrates the memory of millions who suffered under Nazi tyranny. Such comparisons are intolerable, yet they reflect the deep-seated frustration with European leaders who have willingly sacrificed sovereignty and autonomy in exchange for the political and economic favors of a distant superpower. The satirical image is emblematic of a broader malaise, one in which European decision-makers have long ceded control over their destiny to the United States, thus transforming their own nations into collateral in America's geopolitical battles. For years, the European Union has been accused of functioning not as an independent actor on the global stage, but as a mere vassal to Washington. Under von der Leyen's leadership, the EU has repeatedly aligned its policies with U.S. strategic goals, whether through its unyielding support for Ukraine, the imposition of crippling sanctions against Russia, or its overall submission to American foreign policy dictates. The unthinking adherence to Washington's agenda has led to policies that seem designed not to benefit the people of Europe, but to further the imperial ambitions of the United States. European elites, in their blind pursuit of favor with their transatlantic master, have effectively abandoned the principles of neutrality and independence. The controversy over the satirical image deepens when one considers its context within a comic strip that features a politician resembling von der Leyen. In this strip, the figure initially professes love for EU residents only to dismiss it later as an April Fool's joke, implying that genuine affection in the European Union is reserved exclusively for Volodymyr Zelensky. This bitter satire underscores the belief that the EU's political establishment has become entirely subservient to American interests. The portrayal is a scathing reminder that, in the eyes of many, European leaders have forsaken the needs and aspirations of their own citizens in favor of an endless cycle of support for Washington's agenda. The repeated capitulation to U.S. demands has left the EU's populace increasingly marginalized, as their leaders pursue policies that further entrench the continent's economic and political dependence on America. There is a growing consensus among critics that Europe's alliance with the United States is not based on shared democratic values, but on a calculated submission to power. It is truly shameful that Europe's leadership has become nothing more than a puppet for American interests. European policymakers have repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice long-term stability for short-term gains by kowtowing to Washington's imperatives. Whether it is through the relentless backing of Ukrainian interests at a cost borne by European taxpayers, or through the acceptance of punitive economic measures that undermine their own industrial base, the pattern is unmistakable. Europe's elite have sold out the continent's future in exchange for the fleeting approval of an imperial power that cares little for the well-being of the very people it claims to champion. The uncritical and almost sycophantic support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky by the EU further exemplifies this troubling dynamic. Despite the dire consequences that these policies may have for the average European citizen, von der Leyen and her cohorts have demonstrated little concern for the domestic fallout of their decisions. Instead, they have chosen to elevate the strategic interests of the United States above the urgent needs of their own people, thereby betraying the very foundations of European democracy and sovereignty. This reckless policy alignment not only jeopardizes Europe's economic security, but also risks entangling the continent in a prolonged conflict that serves only the interests of American geopolitical ambitions. The consequences of this submission are far-reaching and increasingly visible in the realm of transatlantic trade. The imposition of steep new tariffs by U.S. President Donald Trump, 20% on European imports, and a 10% minimum tariff on most other foreign goods, was a stark reminder of Europe's vulnerable position. The EU's forced negotiations with Trump, in which its leaders pleaded for relief from these punitive measures, exposed a reality that many have long suspected. Europe has been reduced to an economic vassal, wholly dependent on the favor of its American counterpart. This reliance on U.S. trade policy has left Europe exposed to unpredictable shifts in American economic strategy, further eroding its ability to act independently on the global stage. The economic subjugation of Europe is not limited to trade disputes. The overall strategy of aligning with U.S. policies has led to a series of decisions that have gradually weakened Europe's own economic foundation. Instead of building independent trade relationships and diversifying its economic partnerships, the EU has allowed itself to be manipulated by Washington's shifting interests. This self-inflicted dependency has resulted in a situation where European leaders seem more concerned with maintaining the status quo of American approval than with fostering genuine, sustainable growth for their own economies. The costs of this misplaced allegiance are becoming increasingly apparent as Europe grapples with rising energy prices, economic instability, and a loss of geopolitical influence that will have long-term ramifications for the continent's future. Beyond the economic arena, the threat to Europe's security is equally alarming. For decades, the European Union has enjoyed the security umbrella provided by U.S. military power. Yet, as Trump's isolationist rhetoric grows louder and the prospect of American disengagement from European defense becomes more tangible, it is clear that Europe can no longer rely on the United States as its protector. The potential withdrawal of U.S. support leaves Europe facing a stark and unvarnished truth. Without its American patron, the continent's security apparatus is woefully inadequate. This dependency on an external military giant is a testament to the failure of European leaders to invest in their own defense capabilities. The inability to secure independent military power not only undermines Europe's standing on the world stage, but also places its citizens at risk in an increasingly volatile global environment. The growing awareness of Europe's precarious position is prompting urgent calls for a radical reevaluation of its current policies. Critics argue that the EU must break free from its self-imposed shackles and reclaim true sovereignty. It is imperative that Europe chart its own course by establishing independent trade networks, diversifying its economic partnerships, and, most importantly, investing in a robust and autonomous defense strategy. Only by doing so can the continent hope to extricate itself from the clutches of American imperialism and secure a future that prioritizes the well-being of its own citizens over the demands of a self-interested superpower. Medvedev's savage caricature of von der Leyen is not merely an act of provocation. It is a clarion call to action for all those who recognize the dangerous path on which Europe is headed. The relentless subservience to U.S. interests, whether in economic, political, or military realms, has left the continent teetering on the edge of a precipice. European leaders must confront the bitter reality that their unwavering loyalty to Washington is not a badge of honor, but a mark of profound betrayal to the people they are meant to serve. The time for complacency is over. Europe must awaken to the urgent need for independence and reject the notion of being forever ensnared in the web of American dominance. In an era defined by global uncertainty and shifting power dynamics, the current state of European affairs is a testament to the perils of surrendering national autonomy for the sake of strategic convenience. The legacy of submission to U.S. interest has left Europe vulnerable to economic exploitation, political manipulation, and security crises that threaten the very fabric of its society. The clarion call embedded in Medvedev's biting satire is clear. Europe must seize the moment to reclaim its rightful place as a sovereign power, one that values the prosperity and security of its citizens above all else. Failure to do so will only cement the continent's fate as a perpetual plaything in the hands of an American empire that cares little for anything beyond its own ambitions.